Research has shown that family environment is a significant predictor of outcomes for kids following traumatic brain injuries. But how can family environment, things like intimacy and parenting and communication styles, impact outcomes in children and adolescents with learning and mental health challenges? And what aspects of the family environment enhance overall well-being? Well, my guest today, Dr. Jessie Fischer, is going to answer those questions. Dr. Fischer is a licensed clinical neuropsychologist who specializes in the assessment of children, adolescents, and young adults who think and learn differently. His clinical expertise involves assessment, diagnosis, academic and treatment planning for individuals with neurodevelopmental concerns, such as dyslexia and ADHD, but also traumatic brain injury, concussion, epilepsy, emotional difficulties, and other complex medical conditions. Dr. Fischer sees children and families in Los Angeles, where he was born and raised. I'm so glad that he's joining me here today.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Hi, Dr. Fischer. Thanks so much for joining me.
Hello. So glad to be here. Thank you for having me on.
It's nice to be able to interact with you in this space as well, because we work together clinically, but then also to have you on the podcast is just like a bonus.
Right. Added cream on top of the cake there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I wanted to have this conversation with you because, we have a number of conversations about identifying learning and social emotional challenges in kids. That's what we do in our clinical work. And we've talked a lot about that on the podcast. How can we provide these kids with appropriate support? And first, we have to identify what the struggles are. And oftentimes, there's a focus on the academic support. What can be done at school to help my child better access the curriculum? How can we address these weaknesses in my child's learning profile? But I'm really intrigued by the work that you've done because you talk a lot about the importance of family environment. And I'd love for you to maybe we can begin with why look at family environment when we're talking about a child being seen for a psychoeducational or a neuropsychological assessment.
Right. So, yeah, it's so important and to look at that aspect of it. I mean, we all know it's not, rocket science to think of how, important family is, right, in development. But really, I think drilling down in the research shows us how sensitive early childhood and throughout development childhood is to our environment around us. And that includes the family. And there's so many aspects of the family environment, what that looks like, whether it's caregiver-child relationship, parenting style, or just resources of the family that can play into many different behavioral or social developmental, pathways that a child kind of grows into. So, when we think about learning and a child's ability to focus in school, what's going on at home, problem-solving strategies that have been honed in on in the home environment, so many factors can play into child's engagement in that learning process. And so, yeah, I think it's key and that's what, we're able to do with a comprehensive evaluation is dive deep into those areas as well, not just kind of look at how are they performing, on testing.
Right. And that makes sense because we know that the brain doesn't develop in a vacuum. It develops in a context of an environment, and environment plays a role. We've got genetics, we've got a genetic predisposition to certain things, but environment shapes how our brain is going to develop.
Right. Yeah. And really, I mean, looking at research on neuroimaging kind of supports this, right? That we have a large bodies of literature showing how there are brain differences in those with varying types of family environments, whether it's good and strong, positive aspects of the family environment, or on the kind of stressor side of things, and that we're sensitive to, and especially in childhood, and our brains are sensitive to.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to, for parents who are listening, it's not that we're looking to the environment to kind of place blame for the struggles a child is experiencing, because a lot of the family environment can also be a buffer and can actually support a child's learning profile or social emotional development. That's important as well, to kind of see where the child is, what the family environment structure looks like in terms of risk factors for difficulties, but also how can this family environment further support and promote the development of new skills and new abilities.
Absolutely. Yeah, we see a ton of support for the power that what we can call protective factors play a role in buffering the or improving the recovery after, say, a brain injury, or even emotional functioning after a trauma or stressor in childhood, and how powerful a buffer that family can be to help, and also the possibility of changing that environment is always there, right? And it's never too late, right, to kind of work on that.
Right. And from your research and related research, it really has shown that the family environment can be a significant predictor of outcomes, neurobehavioral outcomes following, you mentioned traumatic brain injuries in kids, but it sounds like some of those predictors factors may also predict neurocognitive and learning outcomes in children with neurodevelopmental disorders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what was really interesting about looking through all the literature on brain injury is that those studies compare how those families and children are doing to typically developing children who are not injured, and we get to see how they are doing. But also, many studies look into, okay, how are children doing before the injury? And ask about that pre-injury functioning to see, okay, actually this pre-injury family environment is a strong predictor of how this child is doing after. So whether it's a bodily injury, brain injury, or other stressor, that kind of has set the stage for, we think of an athlete being a good patient for bodily injuries like breaking an arm or spraining an ankle. An athlete is very well set up to recover well and bounce back from that injury. In the same way that having that positive family environment, those strong relationships, can play such a key role into helping children move through those challenges.
Absolutely. And there's so many factors when you think about that family environment that you talk about. And I'd love for you to talk about aspects of the family environment that predict, challenges in child development, but they can also be protective factors that you mentioned.
Sure. So, as you said, it's a complex picture, right? There's many parts of it, but, certain factors stand out. And so we look into those internal family factors. So caregiver-child relationships and characteristics, whether it's family intimacy, communication, and problem-solving strategies within that relationship. And then also families factors more external to that, like financial resources, caregiver strain, and even racial discrimination that parents experience. So those factors can predict a range of challenges, but also buffer outcomes. So we think of the challenges that come up from, for example, challenges with communication in the family, or a strain in the family caregiver-child relationship, can predict challenges with behavioral regulation, social emotional difficulties, even exacerbate challenges with anxiety or depression, right? But on the flip side, having more resources or having those strong relationships also predicted better outcomes. And so behavioral regulation that was, much more adaptive and after a stressor, or social emotional functioning that is in line with what you'd expect and what you'd hope given their age, even after a trauma or stressor. And so we see that it's two sides of the same coin, in that they can be so helpful and so powerful and important, and also modifiable, also targeted at the same time.
I think that's a real important piece, is that the fact that you are able to identify some of these factors, these risk factors, but also protective factors, also provides an opportunity for targeted intervention, right? I mean, there's some things that you may not be able to control in terms of, some aspects of socioeconomic status, but that also provides opportunity for where support might be needed in terms of resources. And, when you talk about environmental factors, you mentioned family stress, parenting style, adverse child experiences. Those are all very complex, particularly when they start to interact with each other. You've got, maybe significant stressors, and then you've got a particular parenting style, and then you've got these early childhood experiences. Sounds like they can all interact with each other in a positive or a negative way.
Right. Right. Yeah. And so it's really kind of like, I think of it as a stew, right? And so many ingredients go into that stew and are kind of cooking and creating the product there. And that can set the stage for whatever experiences a child may have. Right. And so you accidentally spill some lemon juice in that soup. Well, if it was great already to start with, maybe it's not as noticeable, right? So, you think of it that kind of very simplified way. It really boils down to, from these large bodies of research that we see, the factors, the complex factors need to be kind of drilled down. And that's what we're able to do with an assessment is take each of those and weigh them, right? Okay, what needs to be prioritized as far as targeting this aspect of family, communication, or whether it's just getting basic needs met and looking for, making sure there's access to healthcare that they need, or access to food and nutrition, on the social work side of things, right? There are many aspects of what we can target and lay out a support for that can be beneficial and buffer all of those challenges that we know come up in childhood.
Right. And it seems like that family environment can really buffer against the stress, that threat detector, that we have, and can exacerbate learning and mental health challenges, right? But then it sounds like you're saying that they can also be a protective factor. So what are some of those aspects that can be protective for individuals who, maybe it's a pediatric traumatic brain injury, but also maybe significant learning challenges or mental health challenges? What are some protective factors?
Sure. Yeah. So clear protective factors that come through, and I think this is just there are large bodies of research supporting the parenting styles that can really buffer these challenges that come up. Descriptors that come up in the research are warm parenting, authoritative parenting styles. So that's, it's not rocket science. It's harder to do than in practice on a day-to-day basis, but we know what predicts these good outcomes. So that nurturing, warm, but also setting limits and setting boundaries and sticking to those as best we can, right? Having that combination of limits and warmth. And on the flip side of it, being having that strain on the family, or having more punitive or permissive type parenting styles. So this is hard depending on the, privilege level of the family or circumstances that parents may be in, their work-life balance, right? But their ability to set limits, or if they rely heavily on punishment, because of whether it's safety reasons or just a lack of time to engage with their children, these can predict challenges socially and emotionally. Not to say that it's, a one-to-one relationship or locked in at all. There's many other, like we said, complex factors that kind of go into it, but these are ones that stand out. And on the resources side of things, this is something that came in strong on outcomes, but also looking at brain differences. Families with higher incomes and higher SES, socioeconomic status, show differences in brain development throughout their trajectories. So the learning and memory center, what we know of as the hippocampus, right? There's volume differences. So the size of it is different depending on, now this varies across studies, but it can really show that, resources and family environment has that neural effect, as well as playing a role behaviorally in how children are doing.
Right. And when you talk about kind of that aspect of that factor rather that plays a role in enhancing learning and causes differences in brain volume, and you talk about, income, family income, right? This is something that a lot of parents may not have control over. You can't just go in and say, I'd like, a $30,000 increase in my salary. But it sounds like it's not necessarily just the salary, it's what the salary allows the family to do that leads to that increase in brain volume and brain connectivity, because parents can then provide their children with enrichment activities. You can sign your child up for karate and robotics, and they can do an art class and, sign up for, a high level, sports team, things like that. And it sounds like being able to do those things really shapes and facilitates those brain connections.
Absolutely. It's really a proxy, right, for in general being able to engage in those enriching activities, and exposure to nutrition and things like that it's obviously harder when families have lower resources, but especially with supports, families can find ways to access that still. And so, it's not like we said, one-to-one relationship there for sure.
Right. And it may be that parents have to be more persistent in seeking out those opportunities, those community resources through the school, that those are all important things to think about and to consider, particularly if those are areas where you identify that might be, an area of weakness for the family, or an area that could really make a significant difference for a child's development.
Yeah, and there's clear, evidence of the effectiveness of family-based therapy and counseling supports. So, if that's something that's needed, it's out there. Family-focused intervention for individuals and families who have had children with a brain injury, but also just families in general going through challenging times, right? Those supports are out there and are effective in helping to shift what may be challenging dynamics at the time that all families go through, but at certain times support may be needed more so in certain families than others, and that's out there, and that's huge, that from all the work that was gone into this recent, project that I went through with Talene Babikian and Chris Giza, other great co-authors. The takeaway seemed to be that empowering message of these are treatable and you can target these factors, but also that family environment is to a certain extent a policy choice. And so not only focusing on the individual family environment, and what can parents do, but what can we just as a broader kind of society to do? And I can kind of get on my soapbox about this, but really that, making sure that families are supported, whether it's family leave or other kinds of supports that can create that and allow parents to be able to do what they want to do, provide what they want to provide to their children, is kind of another aspect of this that I think is, should be a helpful one.
Absolutely. And I completely agree with you about the societal changes because, there's some things that are under, government control, right? And regulation, there are regulations and, school districts in terms of funding for schools and after school programs and enrichment programs within publicly funded schools. There are things that we can do to support families, and agree with you on the paid family leave, because part of what we want to do is reduce family stress, because we know that family stress can play a significant role in outcomes. And, just think about the role of stress. I mean, family stress can have a negative impact on brain development. And you talked about the hippocampus. I mean, you can actually have, brain cells that die as a result of chronic stress. And so if we can alleviate that stress with a family-focused intervention, with social supports, with opportunities for enrichment and also opportunities for parent training, all of that together can address a lot of the issues that we can see. And we can see better outcomes for not only kids with traumatic brain injuries, but kids with neurodevelopmental challenges and kids who have maybe challenges that have not been identified as a specific learning disorder or a neurodevelopmental disorder.
Absolutely. It's something that should be activating to us as clinicians, right? To look into these factors, to really dig down, have those, honest conversations, with families. It's absolutely, of course, relevant for families themselves, but also just, at the, how we vote, for example, right? Or how we advocate at the policy level as psychologists or just, within our own families, to know and to highlight the importance of supporting that family environment as such a critical, period for, investing in the future, right? Investing in our children and knowing that these interventions, whether it's food access, healthcare access, or parent support, has that neural effect, has that biological effect, and optimizes the learning that a children, allows them to be that sponge. So in school, and so really, it can dovetail into a whole bunch of different areas.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the wheels in my head are just like turning right now. I'm thinking about all the things that need to be done, because I think we already know about the relationship between socioeconomic status and resources and educational outcomes. We know what that looks like. But what you've also shown is that it predicts the way brains are organized in general. It's not just the reading and writing and math scores. It's those early childhood experiences, and those social supports that are in place when kids are really young can impact the way their brains develop.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And throughout every stage of development that is as important. So, parents of teens, right? Especially males, boys are their brains are developing for even longer, right? Up into late 20s even, and so that plasticity continues to be important, and we can take advantage of that. So there's always hope there in my mind. At least I like to see it that way, right?
Absolutely. And I think it's really important to really recognize again that the brain, like you said, is plastic. It's, neuroplasticity is a wonderful thing, which means that we have multiple opportunities throughout an individual's development to intervene and provide that support and impact the way the brain continues to develop. Because like you said, like, even though the amygdala and that stress center is, formed earlier than the frontal lobe, we still have the ability to impact that prefrontal cortex and other areas of the brain. It's not that they can't be impacted, but we have the opportunity to impact them in different ways. And when you can impact parts of the brain that control learning, control attention, control emotional regulation, control planning, organization, you really have an opportunity to impact, a child's life and their outcomes.
Mm-hmm. We think of it as often, and we talk about it often as two systems, right? Our body, our physical health, and our mental abilities, our cognitive skills, right? But it's so strongly tied together, and it's really one big system, right? And so any way we can support one aspect of it, that physical, biological need that we have for, nutrition and exercise, et cetera, has that trickle down effect on our cognitive profile as well over time, right? And how we're able to learn. So, it's all connected, and as we know, and right? But it's important oftentimes to emphasize that with families too, that there are many ways that we can access and optimize support for your child. It's not just, okay, let's work on math and let's work on reading skills, right? There's so much more. So I like to highlight that for sure.
Absolutely. And for listeners who, for parents listening, and they're listening to this research on family environment and kind of the social structures of our society, and they're thinking, what can I do to, optimize my child's development, their learning experience, to kind of buffer them against some of the stressors of life and have, enhance well-being in terms of their mental health. And if they have these learning and thinking differences and challenges that impact them, what can they do at home to kind of support their child's journey?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and there's so much to it.
I know there's a lot, but they're thinking, what can I do? What can I do now? Or what are a couple things that I can do?
Those are questions that we get, right? That's our questions that we are asked. And there's the good thing is there's a lot of research showing what are the heavy hitters, right? What are those low hanging fruit that we can point to that have large effects that we know of, right? And these aren't rocket science, but it's important to remind folks and that it's worth the struggle to get at these factors. It's worth the work to get at things like and make sure to find ways to optimize sleep, to optimize physical activity and access to physical activity of any kind. It doesn't have to be investment in club soccer, but it can be just getting outside and being in nature. we talked about nutrition and the importance of food. And then really, I think that this is something that all parents strive for, right? Is to continue to build that warmth and validating relationship with their child, that they have that container for, this is a safe space that we have at home. And those are all areas that can set children up to do, whatever their capabilities are and capacity is, to really get to that true potential. And so it's easier said than done. But those are research supported, experience supported, and really helpful to find ways to access those.
Right. And I just love how we can kind of bridge that gap between research and real life, because oftentimes we as clinicians have access to a lot of this research, and parents are not reading a lot of these, these medical journals and are sitting in those conferences that we sit in. So having this opportunity to share the results of some of this research and your research with families, with some practical things that they can do that is in their control. Go for a hike, go for a walk around your neighborhood. If there's not a lot of green space, then can you drive out to a park and go on a hike there and then come home? And then really sleep is a big one. I've done a whole episode on the importance of sleep, but that's definitely a factor for, self-regulation, for brain development. It's when, we consolidate our memories and sleep. So all of those things are very important. And then, like you said, providing that nurturing and that warmth, that safe home environment is so important. And that is something that is within all of our control. Some days are easier than others. Right. As a parent, I know this.
Right, for sure.
Striving for that is really key.
And when barriers come up, as they always do in certain areas, that knowing that help and support is out there for any of those areas, and that working with somebody, working with a professional, working with whether it's social worker, a therapist, a counselor at school, to find ways to access it that work for you. If resources are a barrier, finding supports there in the community that we may not be aware of, that are free, that are, easy to access or easier than expected, right? Those are the kind of avenues to get at that as much as we can. And then, we're in a better, feeling better, ourselves, and knowing that our, children have gotten the chance that we want them to get exposure to all those good things as much as we can.
Wonderful. This has been so great, this conversation. I know it's going to help a lot of families. I love having these kinds of conversations. If listeners want to get in touch with you to learn more about your research, about, your clinical work, what is the best way for them to reach you?
Well, I have email or my website. I think maybe we can just put it in the show notes.
Yep, I will.
Definitely, I definitely am available to contact. Feel free to reach out. Obviously, in our clinic that we work together, right, West LA Neuro, is a way to access us as well. And really, I think reaching out is the first step. It doesn't matter who it is. If it's a professional of some kind, to find a way. It can be a hard path to navigate, figuring out what supports your child needs. But calling and looking it up is that first step. So definitely help us out there. This is my broad message.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if listeners need help in kind of accessing those resources and knowing where to look, because that often is a challenge because you just don't even know where to start, feel free to reach out to us. Thank you again, Dr. Fischer, for being here.
This was great. Thank you so much. I loved it.
I hope you got a lot out of today's episode. Make sure to connect with Dr. Fischer. His information is in the show notes, and I will see you next time. Thanks so much for listening.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.